Hello, everybody. Welcome to Brother, My Story. We apologize for the delay. We are ready, though. We are getting started now. I am Dr. Nicole K-Mack. I am a licensed clinical psychologist, and I am president and CEO of Black Mental Wellness. And I am so excited about this event that we're having tonight, Brother to Brother. We started with Black Mental Wellness, we started doing with our virtual conference, we would have a session where men would talk to men about mental health. And at our last conference in November, we had a session called Brother to Brother. And it's really a space for Black men to talk about mental health, what it means to be a Black man, and so many more topics, as if they were like in the barbershop or just talking to their boys. And we really see this as a way of normalizing discussions around mental health, creating safe spaces for Black men to talk about mental health and to feel empowered to talk about mental health. And so we wanted to bring this to you all today. So what some of the trainees of Black Mental Wellness have been working on is several things. One being this panel discussion that we will be having tonight. They also thought about what are some other ways for Black men to tell their stories. So throughout the month of June, we will have, we'll be releasing things on social media. So for example, some people have done reels or they have done videos, which will be posted on YouTube, but it's a whole initiative. And we hope that you're able to check out the various different things that we have this month in store for you. So I want to just jump in really quickly. We have some dynamic speakers and we are still working on getting one of our speakers in the main room. He's been in the chat, but we'll get him in the main room. But just to start off, first we have our moderator, who will be Joyson Balisamore, and he is a proud native of Baltimore, a social entrepreneur, and a holistic health advocate. Like many African-American males, Joyson experienced a number of adverse childhood experiences, most notably the death of his mother. After spending many years suffering in silence with untreated depression and addiction, Joyson found freedom when he gained the courage to share his experiences and express his emotions with a trusted counselor. Next, we have Brennan Allan Steele. He is a best-selling author, speaker, former educator, and therapist in training. He spent 5 years teaching math and leading the social emotional learning curriculum at local schools in Memphis. And through this experience and his personal journey, he became really interested in mental health and published Breathe, a guided mental health journal for Black men. That has now sold over 25,000 copies across the world. Brennan recently released his second journal, Transform, a guided journal for new Black fathers, which aims to support Black men as they adjust to their role as being a father. Next, we have Kyle Toon. Kyle is a husband, father, MSW graduate student, and author of his first poetry book, The Depths Below. He was born and raised in Southern Maryland by a single parent. Kyle enlisted in the U.S. Army on January 2010, and he spent 13 years in the U.S. Army Military Intelligence Corps, attaining the rank of Chief Warrant Officer 2, and on March 1st, 2023, securing an honorable discharge through the U.S. Army Conscientious Review Board. Since that time, he is the founder of Mental and Creative Liberations, LLC, which is an intellectual and creative vehicle that promotes emotional emancipation, mental liberation, and creative freeness through thought, exploration, and writing. Welcome, Kyle. And then lastly, we have Mark Tuggle, who is an NYC author, educator, mentor, and talk radio host. His book on Black men and mental health inspired guest appearances on podcasts in Atlanta, Boston, Los Angeles, New York City, Washington, D.C., Canada, South Africa, and the UK. His passion for serving humanity attracts people from diverse backgrounds. And I am going to bring our speakers to the stage at this time. And because it is called Brother to Brother, I'm going to remove myself and allow you all to have this discussion. For everyone else, please feel free to comment in the chat. We need that feedback from you. There will be a chance for question and answers at the end, and we'll be monitoring the chat as well. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much for those introductions, Nicole. I am truly honored and glad to be here today to moderate this discussion around mental health and what mental health for means as Black men. So throughout this conversation, we're going to touch on many different topics, many different aspects of our identities, about our experiences that might be sensitive, that might trigger some emotions, but the intention and the goal is for us to really just be vulnerable and have a space to openly talk about what we experience as Black men, but also to gain some viable tools, knowledge, and resources that can support us in, the journey of healing and bettering our mental health. But to start, I actually have a question of what has been bringing us joy lately. For me, being outside, getting fresh air, just hearing the birds and the trees has been one thing that really just starts me off on the right foot. But Brennan, can you tell us what has been bringing you joy lately?
Yeah, recently, first, good evening, everybody. Glad to be here. First, for me, recently, I think what's been bringing me joy is so I have a 15-month-old daughter, and she's walking, she is learning how to say some words, and just her little personality is developing. And so, when I come home, like she'll come up to me and give me a hug and stuff like that. So that's kind of what's been bringing me joy recently is just seeing her grow up and come into herself a little bit. So yeah.
That's beautiful. And how about you, Mark? What has been bringing you joy lately?
Well, today I had the opportunity to work out at the gym. Haven't been to the gym in a while, and exercise is an important part of my mental health regimen. So, just giving a chance to get outside. I'm in New York City. It's really warm today, hot, and to walk to the gym, to exercise my body, my mind, my spirit. That brought me a lot of joy today. Thank you.
Wow, that's beautiful. And I'm sure to those watching, let us know in the comments what has been bringing you joy lately. We'd really love to have this to be an engaging and interactive space for those watching as well. But we're here to talk about mental health. And I think it's important, mental health has really been a buzzword lately. We might see it all over on social media, in the news and podcasts. But there's this question of what does mental health actually mean? And does that mean something for us differently for us as Black men? So, Mark, can you tell us from your experience or your perspective, what does mental health actually mean?
So, mental health is my emotional, psychological, and social well being. That's a clinical way of looking at it. It's the thoughts I have, the feelings that I have. It's the way I handle stress, the way I deal with conflict, and it's the choices that I make. Every human being has a relationship with mental health. It's really important for me to take care of my mental health every day.
I think that's a really wonderful definition. And Brennan, can you share your perspective on what mental health means?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Mark said, and I think the reason I love being partnered with Black mental wellness is partially because of like the name is mental wellness and not just Black mental health. And I think about like mental health and mental wellness are not just the absence of having a mental health disorder. It is like your entire well-being where it comes to your emotions, your thoughts, and social connectedness, all those things. Like I think that all of those contribute to mental health. And like Mark said, we all have a relationship with mental health, whether we choose to acknowledge it or not. So yeah.
I think that's such a great perspective. I know for me, often the term mental health might often be associated with, the negatives or perhaps the challenge of mental health. But you just shared how our mental health also includes the ways we're actively taking care of our minds, right? That the way we're actively connecting with others and really supporting. So I love how you both touched on how mental health is really nuanced and it encompasses various aspects of how we navigate this world, how we interact with others, and how we take care of ourselves as well. I think another term that so often is used in discussions of mental health is trauma. And trauma is, a word that's also we're beginning to use and hear a lot more. It's common in the condition post-traumatic stress disorder. Um, so, Mark, could you tell us again, trauma? What does that term trauma actually mean?
Well, to keep it simple, from my perspective, trauma is an emotional reaction to a disturbing event. And that can happen at any part of any day. You go on social media, and you see a Black man getting shot and killed by the police, that has triggered me, for quite some time. So I try to stay away from certain things that break my spirit and take my joy away. People text me stuff sometimes. I don't like a lot of gratuitous violence. So just to keep it simple, trauma is an emotional reaction to a disturbing event.
Thank you, Mark. And Brennan, would you agree, or do you have anything else to add to that understanding of what trauma actually is?
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I feel like Mark is getting those definitions, hitting the nail on the head. I think the thing that I would also say is trauma. We tend to think about trauma as like what they say, like big T trauma. So whether it's abuse, whether it is experiencing a natural disaster or whatever, things that are like more obviously traumatic. But I feel like trauma is also, to Mark's point, the way in which we experience a situation. So where something could be traumatic to one person, it might not be to another, just based on the way that they are experiencing it. And so I think we often, particularly as men, overlook things that we've experienced that are actually super traumatic, because they don't look like what you think trauma should be. But if you've had some type of emotional experience or some type of experience where it's affected you in a negative way, and then it can actually qualify as trauma.
Thank you. A common thread between what both of you shared is trauma has a response, or it has an impact on our bodies, on our lives. I remember, as Nicole mentioned, I remember when I lost my mom at an early age, and my response was actually not being able to process that. I found myself not telling anyone. There were changes in my grades. My grades progressively got lower, and just a lot of changes shifted in my life. And I didn't realize at the time, but now, losing a parent can be quite a traumatic event. But for your experiences, can you share maybe a traumatic event you had during your youth, or maybe even recently, to kind of shape what exactly a traumatic event or experience might look like, and maybe how it had an impact on your life or, your being? And maybe, Mark, if you don't mind starting with a share.
Yeah, December 19th, 1994, I was diagnosed HIV positive, and I thought I was going to die. I became obsessed with death. I became deeply depressed, despondent, sad, hopeless. I felt worthless. I felt broken. I felt dirty. I felt unattractive. I felt sad. I felt alone. I had a lot of conflicting feelings. And thank God I had a friend who, she suggested therapy. And I thought therapy was for rich, crazy white people. This is 29 years ago. So, but I was attracted to her spirit, and she told me that therapy had benefited her. So I was so broken, I didn't even care if it was a male or female or what was their orientation or culture. I knew I needed somebody to talk to. And so that's what I did. And that sent me on my mental health journey, getting better with myself.
Well, one thing that I really resonate with, Mark, is just that sharing of, all those negative feelings that we have about ourselves after such a diagnosis, or how the world might view us, things that we might be told, that really shapes, how we think of ourselves. And I think that is a factor in conditions like depression, anxiety, and just not really being able to love ourselves. And I think it's so important to, like you said, have that person to talk to just express those emotions, how you're feeling, and also give us a different perspective. I think when it comes to trauma, it shifts our perspective in a different way, our mind, and we might not always have those thoughts that are so positive or healthy because of the impact that whatever the event had on our brains. But I know that, as much as going through things like that can feel alone, I realize, we're all going through something, or have been through something, or might eventually go through something that is traumatic. And often it might be our friends or our family members right around us. But unfortunately, historically, we might often have space to really talk about those things out of fear, out of shame, or other issues. But Brennan, can you maybe also share about a traumatic experience that you've had in your life and how it impacted you?
Yeah, I can give one that was more of like a core experience, and then one that's more recent. So I think about the core experience for me was when I was in sixth grade. That was a year that I had started a new school, and I was like pretty intensely bullied for just not being. I was not the athlete. I was the bookworm. Like I like to be answering the questions correctly. And that in middle school, like I taught middle schoolers, like middle school, that's like the worst thing to be. And so I was bullied like pretty intensely all of my sixth grade year. And I like often would respond with crying. And so that became a part of my bullying, was being a crybaby. And the reason why I realized that was traumatic for me was obviously like bullying is a traumatic experience, but at the same time, after that year, I didn't allow myself to cry again until I was like 22. And it stemmed back from being bullied and teased so much for displaying that emotion by other boys that were my peers. And so for me, it took like even processing that in therapy 10 years later to realize how deeply it had impacted the way I showed up and my sense of self. A more recent experience I think about, and thinking about Father's Day yesterday, but then also Black Maternal Health Week was not too long ago. Our pregnancy was actually had a lot of like complications throughout it. And so I was already pretty anxious throughout the process, but then nobody really informed me about the birth process. So my wife had a cesarean section. And so essentially like there's a lot of time where I'm not around. Like I don't know what they're doing. And there was a moment where they had taken me out of the room and had me outside, and they said it was going to be 10 minutes. It ended up being 30, 40 minutes before I saw my wife again. And so I'm over here like freaking out. And it turns out she did have some issues in the labor room and I didn't know. And so I'm already thinking about the fact that we had complications. I'm already thinking about the fact that like my wife is a Black woman, and so Black women have higher rates of mortality when it comes to childbirth. And so all of these things are in my head. And then after birth, she didn't do well with the anesthesia, and so she was sick the rest of the day. And so like having to caretake for my wife in that way when I had never had to do that before, and a newborn at the same time, was pretty, like I didn't realize it was traumatic again in the moment until like I almost broke down like talking about it over a year later. And so I think that even that, like the secondary, like I know like my wife had a lot of significant trauma throughout that whole process, but even like the secondary impacts of that trauma on me as someone who like is loving and caring for these two individuals. And so, yeah, I think a lot of times like what I realize is that when we're experiencing trauma, we're not always sure that it's trauma until like we realize how it impacts the way we show up afterwards. And Black men in particular just try to push through it without acknowledging the ways in which it shifted the way we even see and operate within the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Brennan. It reminds me of my experience. My sister now is blessed with 4 beautiful children, but knowing the statistics, unfortunately, Black women face higher rates of mortality and lack of success when it comes to birthing compared to other counterparts. And you know, the mental health of Black women affects us as Black men. I remember when my sister was pregnant, having those fears, those worries about her experience. And you also shared something, how you faced something 10 years ago and how that, you know, still impacts you today. And I remember, even though my mother passed 10 years ago, that lingered over time. I kept wondering who might I lose next, right? It also caused me to just draw closer and lean in more to the people that I love and care about, knowing that, you know, unfortunately, our community just faces so many disparities when it comes to the protection and the care for our bodies. Mikhail, so glad we were able to get you on. Definitely want to bring you into our discussion. So far, we've really discussed, what mental health means for us as Black men, also what trauma means, and also have really illustrated that through a traumatic experience that we've had in our personal lives and how it impacted us. So if, you could share maybe one or a combination of those things.
I appreciate it. First off, brothers, sorry for having y'all on here and leaving y'all hanging. Everybody that's watching this, I was running through some technical difficulties, but we finally made it through. But yeah, I was listening the entire time. I had two different devices on, playing it while I'm trying to get my laptop up and running. But going back to what you mentioned. When I think of trauma, when I think of mental health, there is a correlation between the two. Trauma affects mental health, and trauma can be anything that overwhelms our central nervous system, anything. And I know for someone who, you have everything from childhood adversities to witnessing a racial type violence, cultural violence. I used to work with sexual assault victims, and so there's a lot of trauma that goes that they are embattled with. And then as far as just the mental health, I look at mental health as just it's an integrative process. It's our way of just trying to maintain harmony and wholeness, psychologically, spiritually, emotionally, cognitively, and behavioral. And so, when you put all those pieces together, and depending upon how we respond to it, and depending upon our threshold to handle said experience or culminate or a series of experiences, it definitely weighs in on our mental health, whether positively or negatively.
Thank you, Kyle. And to those watching, would love to know your thoughts and ideas on what trauma means, what mental health means, or maybe if you relate to any of the experience, we've shared. We've talked about losing a parent. We've talked about, having a diagnosis of a life condition, experiencing a loved one, a woman in our lives, experiencing pregnancy, and also just being a Black man in this world, witnessing how other Black men are losing their lives at the hands of police intended to protect us, or often not getting justice, even after such an event. So please share your thoughts as well. Brennan, you shared something I want to go back to about not us as Black men, not really being able to express and share how we feel. Growing up, we might have heard messages like, don't cry, or if we were to cry or express emotions, it might be met with criticism or even discipline and punishment. These types of experiences might be thought of as also another term, toxic masculinity. And I want to just dive into what ideas of masculinity, as well as mental health as Black men, particularly growing up, what kind of messages that we have, what was the way or the ways in which we were able to express, did we really have space in, freedom to express our emotions and how we felt, or would that be met negatively in certain spaces? Maybe Brennan, can you talk about more about that experience of not really feeling like you could really share your emotions, or maybe certain ways in which you would express your emotions might not have been met, so comfortably?
Yeah, I think there's two thoughts that come to me from my personal experience, but also things that I hear as I'm working with male clients, and particularly Black men. I think a lot of times, one, to the idea of like kind of the space that we feel like we don't have to express. A lot of times, I feel like we run into examples that are shown of like what it means to be a man that aren't very healthy versions of what it means to be a man. So, for instance, like I don't think I ever saw any of the men in my family cry, or any of my men in my family actually like express emotion about things that should be like met with emotion, whether it was like the loss of their parent or the loss of a loved one, or just a lot of different life experiences that were not met with um, emotion. And so that taught me as a man that I don't show emotion. Like that's like what not some what men do. The next piece of that, I think, is that when it is shown, I think there is a tendency for us to then question one's masculinity. So then it's like you become like, if you do cry, you're weak, and then if you're weak, you're feminine, and all these things. And so there's so much pressure to like uphold a certain ideal of manhood that both the examples that we see and like the message that we get when we don't match those examples just limit the space that we feel like we have. So those are a couple of things that came up when you were asking that question for me.
Thank you, Brennan. Adding to that, maybe Mark, maybe can you share, growing up, do you remember feeling like there were safe spaces in your life where you could, share your emotions, how you're feeling? Were there other representations of African-American men in your life that were actively maybe crying or laughing or really having, sharing about these maybe intimate experiences? Mark, can you share about your experience with that?
Yeah, I'm 63 years old. I got a baby face. And I was born and raised in South Side Chicago in 1960. And in my family, my neighborhood, there were very few examples of affection and intimacy and transparency and vulnerability. We live in a world full of anti-Black misandry, anti-Black racism, white body supremacy. And, this whole idea around toxic masculinity to me is really not an issue. But it's just something that we talk about. But I didn't see the human touch, men touching each other in a gentle, nurturing way. We have this idea that to nurture is to be feminine, and only women have intuition. Only women can be sensitive, and all these issues around gender. And I think that we need to reimagine gender from a male point of view. And so I didn't see that. And it just made me wonder, is there genuine love amongst my brothers, amongst my father, amongst my grandfather, the men in my neighborhood? Because there was that human touch. It was absent, because the way we have been programmed, the way we've been conditioned, the way we've been socialized to think if you touch a man, then that means you must be gay. And that's not true. But that's just the message that we were getting. It was somehow touching, as Brandon was saying, is sort of with being feminine. And I believe that everyone has a masculine and feminine energy, but how do we balance it? As my brother was talking about harmony and wholeness, I think we should reimagine how we express ourselves without thinking that we're going to be judged, ridiculed, ostracized, demonized. If I hug you, it doesn't mean I want to have sex with you, right? But sometimes that's the perception that people have around men. Just to hug another brother, people will question your character, your manhood, and your spirit. And I think that needs to change.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Mark. And, Kyle, through your work, you're able to engage with Black men. I'm curious if you think the perspectives of Mark and Brennan are common. Do a lot of Black men have this discomfort around expressing emotions or affection with other Black men? And is it common to really not have these representations of affection, of vulnerability, maybe from your own experience or from those that you've really interacted with through your work?
Yeah, I definitely think that when you, a lot of the males that I've encountered, whether through practice or my time in the military or family members or close kinfolk, and what you'll see is that my dad didn't hug me, my dad didn't kiss me on my cheek, my dad didn't sit down with me and tell me and give me comfort and give me warm affection. And when you follow that historical and at historical context, his father's father didn't do that as well. And so what you'll see is that the disconnect is very much a part of the kind of like the family, socialization process. And so if it's part of that, and then when it's time for the individual to become a father, like myself, when you have sons, I have two, I didn't quite know what to do and how to show up. And so I would say that phenomenon is very real. Unfortunately, I grew up as a kid. I was always very warm-hearted. I always looked for good. I always looked for doing right by people. I was service oriented. And so I remember growing up in Southern Maryland, and a lot of times I would get labeled as soft. And here I am in my early 30s, and I'm just now starting to confront that in therapy, with the whole feeling ostracized from my peers that I thought were my friends at the time, the illusion of friendship. And so, I encountered it. So many people around me encountered it. And again, it's unfortunate that femininity and masculinity, there's always this division when there should be a very, there should be a balance. There should be, how do I tap into both, and how do I fuse both in order to be the best version of myself for my community, for my family, etc.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that, Colin. To those watching, let us know, did you have representations of affection from, other Black men in your life, or did you have a similar discomfort and feel that you really didn't have space to express your emotions, share your feelings? And as we talk about this, I want to dive into the impact of us not really feeling safe or comfortable enough with expressing and sharing our emotions, our experiences with others. I know for me personally, after experiencing the loss of my mom, I didn't talk about it. And without me even realizing it, I ended up having high blood pressure, heart disease, hypertension. Unfortunately, affects a lot of African American men, and studies show that stress, some might call it even suppressed rage, suppressed grief, has an actual impact on our heart. But I remember a pivotal moment that changed my life was actually talking about it. When I was able to vocally say it, I remember just so much emotions coming out. And that must have been what was really burdening my heart. But maybe Brennan, can you share, what do you think were some of the impacts on your life of not always feeling safe enough to express your emotions, or even, facing, backlash or bullying from, ways in which you really just wanted to share and express yourself?
Yeah, I think that I believe that we carry, even if we don't express our emotions, we carry it in our bodies. And so whether that shows up in different health situations, or if it's just literally like, you don't know why, like you got that crick in your neck. You don't know why you're really like tensing your back all the time. Like I feel like the things that don't like come out of us, like they are held within us. And so I think for me, I think it got buried so deeply that like when I came into spaces where I had to give, so for instance, my first year teaching, I was teaching at an all boys school. 95% of those boys were Black boys. And so I'm teaching 85 boys throughout the day. About 80 of them looked like me. And it was just the weight of that as like a Black male educator, on top of like a lot of them had several adverse childhood experiences, a lot of trauma they were dealing with, and then coming to me as someone who was a neutral party in their situations, trying to help them. It was too much for me to even be able to carry, because I hadn't dealt with any of my stuff. And so at that point, it just all all came out. And that's when I sought therapy, but it led me to feeling like I was going to cave under the pressure. And a lot of times, I'm sure we'll talk about this, a lot of times for Black men, it's like we get to that point where we're not seeking the help and we're not doing the work to like release it. Like the only option feels like escaping. And that's where I got to, where the only option felt like, let me just end it. Like it doesn't feel like anything else is going to work at this point. And that's because there were so many things that I hadn't processed, and I was still carrying the pressures of being a Black man, carrying the pressures of trying to hold all this other trauma from my students as well. So I think, I think it just leads to, if it's going to come out some way, and it unfortunately it comes out in not the best ways, and times where we are not actively doing the work to process and feel and then explore those things that we've experienced.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Brennan. And Kyle, I would love if you can add on, from your personal experiences and your work with Black men, how might, really not sharing, expressing these experiences that we've had, our emotions that we're, going through, or maybe suppressing them, might show up in our bodies, or even in, how we treat other people in our relationships.
Yeah, right on. I definitely can. Listening to Brother Brennan talk, it took me back when I first sought therapy. It made me think about what was the breaking point when I realized that I was completely spiraling. I did not have the language to identify or label or even merely understand what I was going through. And it was when, so I've been with my wife now, total 15, married for 11. And when she was showing me like true unconditional love, I didn't respond in like a normative way. I responded by being self-destructive. I respond by being self-sabotaging. I tried to drive her away. And if looking at all this, looking at it on the surface, it just looks like, oh, well, afraid of commitment, not ready. And what ended up coming about it was the fact that the matter was that because I was holding so much in childhood adversities. At the time I was joining the military, and I was that wasn't my passion. And I really wanted to do something else artistically and creatively with writing and so I was battling with that, and I just remember that I completely shut down from genuine, meaningful connection. And I started seeking the frivolous things in life, and like drinking and casual dalliances and all that. And I was just reckless. And so it took for my wife to kind of let me know that she was at her breaking point. And that's when I sought therapy for the very first time. I never, ever thought that I was going to be in therapy. I didn't know what a therapist was at the time, really. And that's when I started to realize, through the work, I ended up realizing that a lot of self-hatred, I had a very low self-esteem, but I wore a facade that I was confident and I was self-assured. And that made me realize how much I was bottling up, how much emotional suppression was going on in my life. And and I'm kind of glad that it took that for her to say, I'm at my point. I have reached capacity with you. For me to, at that point, it was the ball is in my hand. What are you going to do? And so I'm grateful that I took that leap of faith.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I know it takes a lot of vulnerability and courage to just be able to open up and share with someone the things we're going through. But for all of us, it might have been quite a long time to be actually be able to open up and, just giving ourselves grace. Those of us watching might have, not be in a place right now to share, but we really do hope that that, you're supported, the things that you've been through, maybe we have been through. And hopefully we do get to a place where our sons, our daughters, our families, and we ourselves feel just comfortable sharing our emotions, our experiences with others in a way where we won't be, bullied or, looked at as differently and, really isolated for doing so. As we see, there are so many negative outcomes that come from us, really holding back our emotions and not being able to share our experiences. But it sounds like between all of us actually getting in touch with a counselor or a therapist really played a major role in taking better care of our mental health. I know, Mark, that you shared being recommended to speak with a counselor about your experience. Can you share how that journey was for you and what you learned from it and, how it really impacted your mental health?
Yeah. When I was a kid, I was emotionally and physically and sexually and verbally abused more than once by different people. And I became very isolated, very lonely, very withdrawn, very mistrustful, very suspicious. I never developed any coping skills. And so I became very irresponsible and self-destructive. I can identify with both the brothers who shared their experiences. And that led to alcohol, drugs, food, sex. And being diagnosed HIV positive was actually a wake-up call. For the first time in my life, I sat down in a room with someone I didn't know, and I bared my soul, and I would see this therapist once a week, every week for 3 hours, for 3 years. And we didn't even talk about HIV. We talked about the little boy inside of me who felt broken and unappreciated, and I learned how to establish boundaries. I learned how to say no. I learned how to treat myself kindly. I learned how to prioritize mental health. I learned how to journal. I learned how to express myself in a way that modeled dignity and self-respect. And I learned how to celebrate small victories and treat myself kindly. Therapy was part of my healing process, and it really helped me to heal my heart. And I just felt that I needed to be able to give back to my community the way people were giving back to me. So part of my mental health journey was to be of service to humanity, particularly to Black men like myself, who never felt safe, who didn't have an emotional vocabulary, right? A lot of us don't have a language to express how we feel. So we'll say, I feel some type of way. And that's not a feeling, but that's what you get in the hood. And sometimes it's a mask, because the average Black man doesn't have the courage to say, I feel hurt. You don't get that very often, And so having conversations like this gives us the opportunity to be able to take off the mask that Paul Laurence Dunbar talked about and be able to speak our truth, where we won't be judged, we won't be ridiculed, we won't be embarrassed, we won't be humiliated. So therapy was part of the journey, also going to support groups and learning how to journal, exercise, nutrition, reading books, prayer, meditation, comedy. There's so many different modalities for healing, and therapy was just one of them. And just very quickly, let me just say that therapy is beneficial, but it's not a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not a quick fix. And I think sometimes we tend to blame and shame Black men who choose not to go into therapy for their healing. You can start your own support group, right? Get together once a week, once a month, chop up with your homies for an hour, and let that be your therapy, your therapeutic conversation.
Yes, thank you for sharing, Mark. Just a note to the audience, we will have a question and answer Q&A portion in a few minutes. So just start thinking about a question you might want to pose to any of the audience members, or a general question that maybe we can all add on. But Mark, you mentioned journal. I know one of us here actually has created journals for Black men and also fathers. So Brennan, if maybe you also wouldn't mind sharing about your experience with therapy, as well as coping skills you took away, and now really how you're making that accessible to other Black men.
Yeah, first, Mark, I just want to say I love how you were just like kind of expanding our understanding of what is therapeutic. I think that therapy works, and I think that we need like not everybody, it's not for everybody at every given point in their life. And so I think that that's a lot of the reason behind the journal for me, the journals that I've written. But also journaling was my first therapeutic space. I've been writing in journals since I was a kid, like as a bookworm, but also the kid that didn't want to go outside. I would read and then write in my journal. Like that was me. And so I think like giving those other spaces, I think about journaling as a space to just have that neutral space to get it out your brain. Like if you can't tell anybody, if you can't get to a therapist or get to a homie or whatever, like you can just get it out, because sometimes that's what it needs, and it loses its power as soon as it gets out of your brain. And so just journaling has always been that space for me. And I think also when I wrote Breathe, which is a guided journal for Black men, I was thinking about all the Black men who I started to be like, I need to do some work, but I'm not ready to go to therapy yet. Or I need to do some work, but I don't know where to start. And so it's all about helping develop that emotional intelligence, giving that vocabulary and giving them space to kind of process some of the things they hadn't. But yeah, I think to Mark's point, and to just like thinking about the ways in which we have other spaces that are therapeutic, it's important, and journaling is one of those specifically.
Thank you for sharing, Brennan. And Kyle, please also, share with us your experience. You already touched on how therapy has really transformed your life, but what are some coping mechanisms, or maybe things you do just to self-regulate, to better manage and, deal with different emotions and experiences that you really, continue to rely on?
Yeah, I definitely do believe that when it comes down to healing, that you need a multitude of modalities, especially if you haven't figured out what works for you. Definitely trying out different modalities to see what resonates with you and see what really brings out everything that you are withholding, or you need to make sense of, that you need to document, that you need to try to interpret, etc. And so as far as me, I would say that, therapy was helpful, and therapy is still helpful. I'm still in therapy today. I've been with my therapist now for 1.5 years. It is not, it has to be layered with something else. I do believe that therapy on its own merit is not enough for whatever situation, whatever problem or dilemma that you're working through, or even what trauma you're trying to unravel. I myself, I do a lot of stream of conscious writing exercises. I write poetry. So I'll sit down for 10, 15, and depending upon the day, or 20, and I'll just I'll put myself in a very in not a dark room, but not a lot of illumination like you see right now. Maybe light a candle. And I'll just, turn my phone off, have no disruptions, close the door. And what I'll do is I'll just allow myself that whatever is up here, all I want to do is just put it out. It doesn't have to be, proper sentence structure. It doesn't have to make sense. It doesn't have to be a certain theme. It doesn't have to be a particular subject area or a certain concept that I'm trying to express. I just let it out. So if for example, if I'm just I'm having one of those weeks where it's failure. I feel bad. Not good enough. Love my wife. It could be very random. And it's just what I like to do from there. I like to go in it and I like to pick out what's reoccurring. And I could circle it. And sometimes I have my little nifty color-coded highlighters, and I'll just whatever goes with yellow, whatever goes with red, whatever goes with orange, and I'll just I do that. And then typically from what I do, I take it to the next level and I write something. I write a poem about whatever that is. So my book that I wrote, a lot of my poetry in my book was actually from the stream of conscious activities. After my therapy sessions or between therapy sessions, this is what I would do. On top of that, reading for me is therapeutic. Reading for me is therapeutic. Nature walks, very therapeutic, because typically during nature walks, I'm praying, or I'm meditating, or I'm speaking self-compassion to my life. And so those are just some of the coping mechanisms that I use, and then using emotional vocabulary. So when I'm speaking to anybody, it doesn't matter who you are, what space that we are, I will use what I like to say. Like I tell my kids, feeling words, and not just the feeling words, that I will also say why I'm feeling that way. And then I'll open it up and seek what it is that you're going through, or the impression that you're getting from my disclosure. And so, those are just some that I deal with. The poetry has been very cathartic and therapeutic for me, though. And that's kind of why I do it mostly in between sessions.
Thank you, Kyle. One of the things I appreciate that you all shared is how therapy has been, a tool to use, but it certainly isn't the only tool. I know for me, when I first spoke with the counselor about my experience, I felt that there were still some things I didn't address, right? As I mentioned earlier, I ended up having high blood pressure. And when I actually learned about, plant-based nutrition, how there's properties of plants and antioxidants. I love watermelon these days. And there's actually certain compounds I learned in watermelon that can, really lower your blood pressure. But also there's some things we can consume that can actually contribute to our mental health and our bodies not being in such a healthy state. So for me personally, it was actually a matter of, really cutting down on sugary foods, fast foods, drinking more water, getting more rest, getting more sleep. These were things I really didn't think, could play such a role, but eating more foods that were actually, good for my heart, giving my mind, space to rest or relax, whether it be sleeping at night. I remember listening to like nature sounds, because sometimes my thoughts would be all over the place, and I had to, listen to some like natural instrumental music that I found on YouTube. So, really outside of just being able to talk to someone about what I was going through, there were actually lifestyle changes I had to make to, really care for myself as well. And as we prepare for Q&A, to everyone watching, please start, dropping in questions or things you might want to ask to the panel or just bring into the discussion. But let's really, maybe share some resources that we have relied on personally, or that we might be aware of that would be beneficial to, those watching. You mentioned reading being therapeutic for you, Kyle. I think would be great to hear. Maybe a book you're currently reading that might be helpful for, us to read, and other resources or things that, you think it will be helpful for us all to know about.
Yeah, like the book that I'm reading right now, it's mainly, it's more about, it's really informative and educational. It's called The Developmental Psychology of the Black Child by Dr. Amos Wilson. And he basically, he was a psychologist, rest in power. And, he provides us a framework to understand all the different dimensions of our Black children, from when they are resting in the womb to birth, all the way up through their adolescence into their adulthood. And it's providing us with the different, it's giving us insight into what it is that's going on biologically, what it's going on psychologically, as they're maturing. There's social and environmental factors that come into play, living in urban areas, and also living in areas where racial discrimination is rampant and very prevalent. And so, yeah, that's what I'm reading now. I'm actually finishing up. I'm on the last chapter for that. As far as anything beyond that, I would say one of the self-help spiritual books that I read about a year ago, which was very, very good, was The Untethered Soul and the Four Agreements.
Awesome. Thank you, Kyle. Mark, can you share some resources that have benefited you or that you would recommend, to those of us here today?
I would reiterate what everyone has already discussed in terms of different modalities for healing. Prayer has definitely helped me heal. I pray every day. Meditation has helped me heal. Exercise, nutrition, writing. I have dark days and miserable moments like anybody else. And sometimes comedy brings me joy, humor, laughter. I'll put on Richard Pryor or Robin Harris or Patrice O'Neill, and my whole mood will just shift, and I remember what it's like to be a kid again. Something that's simple is laughter. That's what gives me Black boy joy. I think, but again, I want to go back to advocating for yourself and having your own support group. I really think that can benefit brothers who may not have the money to see a mental health professional. They may not have the time. They may not have the insurance. They may have 8 kids. You know what I mean? So sometimes a mental health professional may not be at this moment in time the most prudent and practical avenue for them. So just to advocate for themselves and have their own support group where they invite 3 or 5 of their homies and then sit down and chop it up from time to time, that can be a way of expressing themselves. And maybe they can share resources in terms of other websites and organizations that they can go to, books that they can read. I love the Four Agreements. I read that twice, shared it with a friend. Because reading, it helps spark my curiosity, my imagination. It helps me to reimagine the world. It helps me go from the darkness to the light and get out of my own head and see something different, something new, something unique, something fascinating. And it helps me to be alive again.
Thank you for sharing that, Mark. And I want to take a second to just recognize some of the recommendations from my audience. I'm seeing yoga. I personally have done yoga, and it's tremendously supported just my mindfulness as well as, really being in tune with my body. Danielle says, love the Four Agreements and the Untethered Souls. Clearly, we'll have to add those books to our need to read list. And Mark also had the recommendation of The Man, Not Race, Class, Genre and Dilemmas of Black Manhood by Tommy J. Curry. So that also sounds like a wonderful recommendation. And last but not least, Brennan, if you could share, resources or things to really offer, everyone here today.
Yeah, I'd I guess put another retweet on Four Agreements for sure. And then I'd say Cry Like a Man by Jason Wilson. It's pretty impactful. It's the idea of allowing men to kind of move out of, he calls it emotional incarceration. And so that's a good one. And then the last resource that I have is not a book, but I think is something I use with all my clients. And I think it's very helpful as a place to start. And it's just the feelings wheel. Is literally go to feelingswheel.com is one option. There's several versions of it, but even if you Google it, you find the one that works for you. And just as like this idea of developing an emotional vocabulary, I have so many, especially when I was teaching, I had so many students. How are you doing today? Good. It's not a feeling. Let's find a feeling word to what Kai was saying. And I think that helps us as men too. Like sometimes we just think like, to what Mark said, I just feel a type of way. And this gives actual words and actual language to that way, and then helps us better process and then identify what we need to do next. And so that was what I'd say.
Awesome. Thank you, Brennan. And I believe we have some questions. I know I cannot see them, but I don't know, Nicole, if maybe you could help with getting the questions on the screen, or sharing them with me so we can answer some of the questions we have for the audience. Oh, Nicole says don't send you on the Q&A. Okay. Yeah, so if you have a question, if you don't mind just dropping it into the chat. And Donna says laughter is the best medicine. But yeah, while we wait for questions, panelists, please feel free to share any other additional comments, or if you'd like to, just talk about the work that you're doing and how your journey before has really become a tool for you to support others. It's really open at this time to really share and further our dialogue.
All right, well, I'll go first. I'm the author of a book. It's called Cultural Silence and Wounded Souls, Black Men Speak About Mental Health. It's an intergenerational anthology. There's 30 men from different backgrounds, and they share their personal experiences and professional views on mental health and mental illness. And so it's mostly stories. They write about anxiety, depression, isolation, loss, PTSD, stress, trauma, paranoid schizophrenia, drug misuse, suicide ideation. A lot of times we don't talk about suicide. The highest rate of suicide today in the U.S. is Black boys ages 5 to 12, and we don't talk about it. And so in the book, there are resources that anyone can use. There are advocates. There are clinicians you can speak with. There are organizations you can connect with. There are helplines you can call. You can call 988. 988 is the Suicide and Lifeline Crisis number. It's free. It's confidential. You can text it. You can call. It's also in Spanish, 24 hours a day. And the resources are designed to answer 3 questions. What can I do? Where can I go? And who can I talk to? And quite often, if you're a Black man with mental health challenges and concerns, you may not have the answer to those questions. People may not ask you those questions, and you may try to go it alone. And so I think it's important that we have resources that we can use to help us heal our woundedness a day at a time. Thank you.
Sorry, I just realized I was muted there. But thank you for sharing, Mark. I realize we just have some questions that are coming in. One from Artega. Hopefully I pronounce your name correctly. But they ask, how important is it to have a historical lens to contextualize our own trauma, even with regards to epigenetic trauma? I don't know if anyone thinks they can, have a response for that question.
Yeah, I can take it on. I think that as far as there's a African concept called Sankofa. Going back in order to know how to go forward. And the thing is that what has been taken away from us culturally and intellectually is that connectedness to our roots and to our origins. And when I'm talking about us, I'm talking about us as the African diaspora. And so the trauma, when you are already cooking in mama's belly and mama's womb, the intergenerational trauma, the historical trauma it's already embedded in the DNA already. So that's the thing about being descendants of the African captives who were kidnapped in the whole slave trade and the chattel enslavement period. And so, yeah, it's very significant. You have to be able to understand what happened to your ancestry, lineal and non-lineal. You have to know what happened. You have to know what they endured. The pains, the sufferings, the stresses, and also the joys, the happiness, and the triumphs. You have to know. You need to be very integrated into the heritage and the historical events and series of events of your ancestry. And because a lot of what you're going through now is not new. A lot of it, I know a lot of times it feels insular and we feel isolated when we're going through these situations. And the reality is that somebody else went through it too before. There's a saying that when you know better, you do better. And so once you're able to know what happened and and be able to fully boost your awareness and critical consciousness, then that can help guide you or help inform you on how you should walk and move and maneuver and also restructure your life and your relationships.
Appreciate you sharing that trauma-informed perspective, Kyle. I know, Mark, you posed the question of what is epigenetic trauma. It's my understanding it simply describes how trauma gets passed down generationally and really gets stored in our bodies and our genes right after an experience of a traumatic event. When it comes to just the way our bodies respond, like certain higher levels of stress that our ancestors experience, has an impact on the DNA and the resilience of our bodies and our immune system, which of course affects, the immune system of their, predecessors, those that come after. So essentially encompassing how the things that those before us went through impacted their bodies, their brains and immune systems, and, their biology really gets passed down to us today. So thank you for that question, Ortega, and for that response, Kyle. Another question comes from David. David asks, as someone seeking a counselor for the first time, how would you know you found the right one?
I can take that one. I think I can kind of answer that as a almost therapist. I'm basically a counselor right now, but a few more months and I'll be official. But oftentimes, what I tell my clients that I see in my internship is one, these are kind of my philosophy of counseling. So that's one way to get to sense of does this match up with the way that I want to kind of go about this, because different therapists have different orientations, theoretical orientations. They have different just ways of seeing people and human existence. And so it's important to kind of understand that, because it might be completely different than what feels good for you and feels right for where you are. I think also, particularly for Black men, because there's not a lot of therapists like me, so a lot of Black male therapists, it's important to make sure that they have some type of cultural awareness. They might not understand what it means to be a Black man. They won't if they aren't a Black man. But to be able to have a cultural awareness, and I also call it cultural humility, in which they are not assuming that they understand your experience, but allowing you to speak towards your experience and creating that safe space for you to do so. I think that's important. But I think ultimately, I think I try to tell people you're not gonna really know that first session. That first session is gonna be a lot of questions around who are you, trying to get to know each other. So give it 3 to 4 sessions before you're this ain't the one. because after 3 to 4 sessions, the therapist should have a good enough idea to start to move into some real work with you. And so, yeah, I think one asking and a lot of therapists do consultations for free. So but if you're at an agency or a space that doesn't do that, one, trying to see what their philosophy of counseling is. Two, if it's not, even if it is a person that looks like you, making sure that they are good at understanding your context. And so getting a sense of that, and then just kind of seeing how y'all's relationship develops in those first few sessions, and if it's someone you feel comfortable with, because ultimately you have to do the most work. The therapist is not the expert. You are the expert on your life. And so you have to be able to feel comfortable to do the work. If you're going every time and you're not feeling comfortable, you're not feeling safe, and they're doing all the questions and all the talking, that you're not actually moving forward. And so when you feel like you're in a space where you can do all those things, I feel like you got a pretty good shot. And it's okay that you see somebody for a year and decide, okay, I need something else. You don't have to stay with the same therapist forever. You can change therapist, just like if as soon as you stop liking a doctor, you try to find another doctor. It's the same idea.
I think those are some wonderful suggestions, Brennan. Thank you. Kyle and Mark, did you have any additional insights you could share when it comes to, wanting to find a counselor or therapist that's right for you?
I appreciate it, Mark. I would also, to add on to Brother Brennan, trust. That's one of the therapeutic factors that dictates whether a therapeutic relationship between a client, counselor, psychotherapist is going to be useful and effective. Is the trust factor. Especially as for Black men, we have grown up in geographical areas where cultural distrust is all around us. And sometimes we don't even trust the individual that looks just like us, that lives right next door. And so now asking for us to trust and to feel safe and to feel and to allow ourselves to be exposed to a stranger due to their credentials and their qualifications of being a therapist, that's a big ask. And so I definitely think that if you are in a session with someone and you do feel that, my secrets are safe with you, I can dig deep and pull out the ugliest parts of me and not feel judged and not feel like I am being criticized in any kind of way. And, I think that you found the right one. And again, it's like meeting somebody for the first time out and about in the social world. You just can't, you got to be vigilant. You just got to be, always assessing, is this for me? Am I the center of the work? Is the therapist bringing themselves into the work too, as being as if it's a revolved around them as well? Are they imposing values on me, imposing belief systems? And so you just it's a lot that go into it, but to keep it simple for everybody, trust. Do you trust them, and do they keep you in the center of the work? Mark, you got anything, brother?
Yeah, thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Brennan. Culture, humility, and trust are both important. I think active listening is very important, to have a therapist who is present, doesn't cut you off, doesn't finish your sentences, doesn't try to fix and manage and control who you are as a person. And can just be present. Some therapists have not learned how to be present. For whatever reason. I've had some horror stories, trust me. There's something called countertransference. You know what I mean? And I've had some horror stories. I've had more than one therapist. I was in therapy on for about 10 years, but culture, humility, safety, trust, active listening, and just knowing that the therapist is not God, right? And the therapist is not there to change your life. Therapists are fallible. and their shortcomings may show up, so yeah, just to keep it simple.
Yeah, thank you all. Some reflections I just heard from you all is one, an importance of comfort, and being able to share and being heard actually from the counselor or therapist. And another one, recognizing, as you just mentioned, Mark, not every therapist might be the right one for you. So knowing, there are opportunities to shift as necessary in order to actually, find a counselor that is, and as Kyle mentioned, trust. I would also affirm, trust being a really, really important factor given the nature of what you share in the relationship that you're going to build with one. So thank you all. Another question comes from Courtney. Courtney shares that so many combos highlight mental health as problems, and it seems what we're talking about is more emotions based on nervous system function. I'm curious about the connection of mental health and emotional health. Mental health seems to highlight the problem, and emotional health appears to highlight the healing. So Courtney's question is, what you all express seems more aligned with experiencing emotions and being witnessed in the emotions and feelings. That said, how do we know our emotions and grow to learn the language of what we feel so that we can experience it and share for healing and support? So I know that's a great question, but I know we mentioned emotional vocabulary. So I think maybe, going on into that might, be helpful for this question.
Yeah, I'll see if I can help jumpstart this thing. And brothers, please, Kev, come on in if you want to hit on some things. So mental health is, essentially, emotional health is a part of mental health. I know that we're probably, this conversation has been centered around the emotionality, because that is an aspect of the black man's dilemma when it comes to operating in this world and also conceptualizing mental health. And I think that what we're talking about here, what we're kind of highlighting, is a paradigm shift to where what is sometimes considered, or mostly considered, taboo, which is emotions and feelings, to actually be at the forefront. And so, yeah, I would say just, as far as, conceptualization, not separating the two. I don't know. I don't know if that's kind of what I'm sensing from the question. Mental health is emotional health, it's psychological health, it's spiritual health, it's physical health, it's overall health. And I think I've heard this before, that mental health is health. And so if you look at only when you go to see your physician, and you categorize, or you classify that as health, mental health, so the way that you think, believe, the way you speak, the way that you act, those aspects too, in conjunction with your physical being. We talked about blood pressure, we talked about somatic experiences. All of that is all in one. And so, I aspire to be a social worker. So I look at things in systems, and I look at things as being very integrative, and I look for how they're connected. And, the thing about emotions is that emotions is connected to, it's very body based. And as far as the language aspect, I know Brother Brennan brought up the feelings wheel. I think for me, like I had to take baby steps. I had to take baby steps. I didn't know anything beyond happy, sad, glad, joyful. I may have knew disgust, and the feelings will help. And also, reading. I also read a lot of poetry, so I read a lot of Maya Angelou and Audre Lorde and James Baldwin. And what that did for me was that opened up my sense of my sense of understanding different emotional states, because that's all that type of poetry that they wrote, and even their essays. That's what it was, kind of integrated into that message. But yeah, I'll open up to the brothers to see if they can have anything else they want to add to that.
I love everything you said, Kyle. And I agree with everything you said as well. I think the only thing that I'd add is one thing that I feel, with people generally, but especially Black folks, especially Black men, is that we don't often give ourselves space to feel in the first place. And so to know our emotions, we have to actually give ourselves space to feel our emotions. I run into a lot of people, and I do it too, where either I tell myself I keep moving. It doesn't matter how this impacted me. I keep doing. I kind of push through. I keep going. I got to be strong. I got to be the one that's strong for the family. Whatever that thing that you tell yourself is, these are the things that we are saying that prevent us from having space to feel. Or I intellectualize. So I can think about a situation all the time. But there's a quote that says that one of the hardest distances for a man to travel is the 16 inches from his head to his heart. And actually understanding what do I feel? And so I think using tools like the feelings wheel, but even just creating the space to check in with yourself on a regular basis and see, have an experience of how did that make me feel? And it could be you just start out with something feels off. I don't know about that. It doesn't have to be these elaborate words at the beginning, but I think making it as much of a practice to be able to create space for your feelings, because they're there, but we're not always expressing them because we're either intellectualizing it or we just keep moving like nothing's wrong.
Body scanning. That was
yeah, that's good. Yeah. Oh, you're muted now, Kyle.
Before you even develop the language, just checking in head to toe. What do you feel in your forehead, the top of your head, the crown of your head? What do you feel? You feel any stiffness in your jaw, your neck, your shoulder, all the way down. And that's just sensations. And you can just start off with just knowing what's flowing, the energetic flow that's going on here. Do you feel something here? Do you feel some shallowness or some hollowness in your stomach? And so I'm sorry for steamrolling that, but I just wanted to put that out there in case it's still kind of confusing about how to gain the language. The first thing is that because it's body based, start with the body.
Yeah, thank you guys. I think you guys did a really great job of just explaining tools like the feelings wheel that can actually help us give language to those emotions, but also elucidating the interconnectedness of our mental health, our physical and emotional health, right? Often if there's a challenge we're experiencing mentally or emotionally, it'll show up in our bodies or vice versa, right? If there's a challenge with our heart or an ache, it might impact how we're feeling, how much energy. So as you guys mentioned, just talked about just being aware of a difference in a different part of your body, and how that might actually be connected to a mental or an emotional challenge. But so the last question we have is from Leroy Jackson, and Leroy asks, how would any one of you create emotional stability or emotional maturity? And Mark, maybe you could tackle that one to give you an opportunity to share.
How would anyone create emotional stability or emotional maturity? That's a good question. Well, I'm still learning about emotional intelligence. I'm still learning about emotional literacy. I'm still learning about emotional independence, because every human being has the same feelings. right? We all have a capacity for joy and pain, for example. I believe that we're all born happy. Everyone may not believe that, but I believe that every newborn child is born happy. I've never met a newborn that was unhappy. I've never met a miserable newborn child. So the joy is part of our biology. I think Deepak Chopra says that pain as a sensation will never end because it's part of our biological inheritance. And so one way to cultivate emotional maturity, in my opinion, is to be honest about the sensations that Kyle was sharing, the sensations that flow through your body every day, taking your emotional temperature, and being honest with yourself. Do I feel sad? Do I feel betrayed? Do I feel anxious? Do I feel depressed? Do I feel excited? Do I feel grateful? Do I feel optimistic? Do I feel uncomfortable? Do I feel misunderstood? Do I feel unappreciated? Do I feel blessed? Like, there's so many feelings that we all experience. And I think the maturity comes, for me, is just telling myself the truth in the moment, right? Because in every moment, I don't feel happiness every moment of every hour. That would be dishonest. That would be disingenuous. So giving myself space for grace and having compassion, having empathy for myself. So when I am feeling depressed or discouraged, or I'm feeling frustrated or insecure, or I'm feeling jealous, or whatever it is, to be honest with Mark. And that way I can relate to another human being in a healthy way.
Thank you for sharing, Mark. What you said reminds me of a saying I'm sure we've all heard, but the truth will set you free. And maybe that certainly has been true for all of us, just with those experiences that we've had, or those feelings that, have been too, difficult to share, or we'd be ashamed to share them with others. But the sense of, freedom and autonomy and, comfort and courage that we experience when we actually do just, let it out and, share the truth about, maybe the pain that we're experiencing, the event or the diagnosis that we've had. But this has been, really a really great discussion. We've all been able to really just share and be open about some of the feelings and experiences that we've had, as Black men, as well as gain some valuable insights and share resources and tools that have all helped us all on our journey. And another part that you shared, Mark, is that you're still learning. One of the mantras I often hear is healing isn't a destination, but it's a journey. And I think that's, so true as we might continue to face traumatic events and unexpected circumstances in our lives that, might bring about some mental and emotional health challenges in the future. And, I really thank, Black Mental Wellness for putting together a space like this, and their ambassadors for creating this space for us to really just speak openly about them, as Black men have this space, in this environment where affection and vulnerability hasn't always been so comfortable. But in spaces like this, hopefully we've all felt a sense of comfort and relatability in sharing our experiences. But I'd love to invite, Nicole back on stage to just have some closing remarks from Black Mental Wellness.
I thought you were going to close it out, Joyson. That was perfect. Thank you all for attending tonight, but most importantly, thank you, Joyson, Brennan, Mark, and Kyle, for what you all brought to this event tonight. I was like texting my Black Mental Wellness team, like, this is incredible, just the way, Black men being able to talk about things that some people may suppress or feel shamed about, but you just, you were vulnerable and you opened up. And we always say that these are the types of discussions that help other people to feel empowered to heal. And that, people say, oh, no one wants to talk about mental health, but we just need safe spaces to do that. So thank you for creating this space tonight. This will be recorded, so even if people weren't here tonight, they will be able to access it. And so for all of you, we have, again, been doing this Brother to Brother. We'll be doing it all month. All of this will be available on our website. Thank you all so much for attending, and I hope you have a good night.